If you want to provide an overview of what you're seeing from EDA, we'll give you probably, let's shoot for say 7 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, and then we want to get to Tracy too and have time for questions. So.
Okay, are you able to see my slides?
I am, yeah. And everyone, Kirk Kaiser is the Regional Director of the EDA, the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Go ahead.
Yes. Good morning. I was out yesterday with a migraine, so hopefully I'm clear today as I speak to you all. But the Economic Development Administration, ultimately our goal is job creation, job retention, and private investment. That's truly how we're measured with a report card to Congress, and then also mixed in with diversification and resiliency sort of efforts. So specifically, I'm going to talk about our ARPA funding that came out mid-summer, I guess, but I'll just jump right to the chase to keep things short and concise. We have investment priorities, so every one of our projects has to address at least one of them. And specifically to ARPA, it needs to for sure include recovery and resilience. But if it includes additional ones as listed here, there's equity, recovery and resilience, workforce development, manufacturing, technology-based economic development, environmentally sustainable development, and exports and foreign direct investment. We have to hit recovery and resilience, but if there's others on there, that's great. But I also don't recommend trying to stretch to make it feel like it should fit there, or trying to make it fit something it doesn't really necessarily fit. So just if you read through it and it says, oh, this sounds like it should be it, then definitely include that in the application. That web link there to the right has more than what's on this slide. It gives a little background of each one of them in more detail. So I will just jump to the slide that's got all of our programs on it. I'm going to actually focus on 3 of them, actually 4 of them. So the Build Back Better one, that ship sailed. The first deadline was October 19th. So we're beyond that. There were, I think, about 8 applications submitted for Montana, so hopefully we'll see some action there. The statewide planning, that was actually non-competitive funding for the state of Montana. Actually, every state, they got $1 million to do statewide planning. The ones I'm going to really focus on are the travel and tourism and outdoor recreation NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Montana received just under, not Montana, our 10-state region received just under 20 million to cover 10 states. So 750 million there sounds big, but when it got chopped up and handed out, there was a significant difference. The state of Montana also got just under 3 million under a non-competitive component, and I believe it's Commerce that's working on that. I don't have all the details because someone else in our office is working on that, but they did accept the award. I just don't know exactly what the scope of work is going to be, but for purposes of this conversation, we do have competitive money. There were 2 sub-tranches, if you will, for funding, trying to make the most competitive projects be funded out of this. The first one was applications received by October 1, were reviewed, and December's decisions announced here actually in the last couple of weeks. The next one that we're looking at is applications received by February 1, will be reviewed probably in February with decisions in March. So if there's any sort of travel and tourism sort of project that comes to mind, to me, it's going to probably, if you just do the math, 10 states, 20 million, roughly 2 million a state, if we're going to spread it around equally. Is it 1 per state? Is it 2 smaller ones per state? I don't know what that's going to look like, but it lists in our NOFO everything from water and wastewater to pier construction to trail infrastructure, all sorts of things. But I think it's really going to have to show some sort of impact on a regional basis, preferably probably even multi-state, to be competitive and then still have that job creation, job retention, and maybe private investment component. I think those are going to be a little bit secondary just because of the nature of that sort of funding. The next one I'll jump to is economic adjustment assistance. This is actually one of our flagship programs that EDA has had around for 50 years or more. But this is our most flexible money, and it truly is focused around the job creation, job retention, and private investment components. So everything from infrastructure to planning, revolving loan funds, although there were several of those that came in requesting money. I don't believe any of them were funded last time. I think there were a lot of RLFs that were funded under CARES Act funding last year. So I think the focus maybe is to fund different areas, I guess, until there's a more demonstrated need, I guess, of additional RLF money. But this is truly our most flexible money. It's everything from incubators to building to building, whatever be the case. We have, I think it was just under 40 million, no, 60 million for this bucket. Yeah, 59 million, but there's a subset of about 24 of it that's set aside for coal impacted communities. So definitely our biggest bucket for the region. Again, that's that 59 million for covering 10 states. The next one is indigenous communities. This funding is specific for tribes. Don't know if we have any tribal members on here. I think I'll probably keep that short because I know we have a tribal EDR that was just hired in October, so he's doing his best to reach out. But if there's any questions, I'll definitely take a stab in answering them. The last one I guess I'll bring up is the Good Jobs Challenge, because that's the next big one that's coming through that's nationwide. And this program is also uncharted territory, kind of like the Build Back Better was for EDA, where we're trying to show there's a need from an employer, that there's an institution or a training facility that can provide the training. It's this whole wraparound service that we, the applicant who can do the training, have a committed beneficiary or industry or several beneficiaries that need a certain set of skills to be trained. And this funding can only be used for equipment and soft money, so it can't actually be building buildings. So it's more on the trying to develop what sort of curriculum is needed and those sort of things. So I think I'm at my 6 minutes, actually 7 minutes. So with that, I guess I would open it up for questions, or if there's time at the end, we do that. But my goal is trying to get as many dollars to Montana and Wyoming as possible out of Denver. So there's no such thing as a bad question, but more than happy to answer any if there are. Thank you.
Yeah, Kirk, thanks. Velda has a question. She's got her hand raised, and then I'll do a follow-up comment.
Good morning, everyone. Kirk, my name is Velda Shelby. I'm the Economic Director for the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And we are interested in some of these initial grants. So you were mentioning you were bringing on new staff. We'd feel, I mean, if you can reach out to us, we did send you a question last week through Janet Camel, but if you can send us the contact information, we do have specific inquiries on the application process.
Okay, I was out last week, so I'm sifting through my inbox today as we speak. So
thank you.
And Kirk, I'll follow up. What's the best way that we can continue to be aware of these opportunities, the deadlines, how they can be best served in communities?
So truly, I think the most efficient is go to eda.gov, and when you pop up our page, it prompts you to sign up for our newsletter. I promise we don't spam a bunch. It's, you know, 1 or 2 maybe a week, maybe more like 1 or 2 every other week. But if there's some big announcement, that's the way it gets splashed out for sure. I have an email list that I send out for stuff that I think is more specific and pertinent maybe to Montana and Wyoming, because that's my region. But truly, if there's a job creation, job retention, private investment sort of project, I just always tell everyone, think EDA, because there's a chance we could participate. Our eligible applicant is basically anyone but a for-profit. So public body, a nonprofit, a tribe, a university, a college, pretty broad as far as that goes.
Great. Why don't you throw your email in the chat? I want to move on to Tracy. And then at the end, when we go through the member updates, we've asked folks to specifically speak about how they're planning to utilize some of these resources and what potential projects, so there can be some information sharing and collaboration opportunities, and it'd be good for you to hear that as well. So with that, thanks so much, Kirk. That's great, and a great segue into the next more localized focus on ARPA, which is Tracy Pohndorf. And she, am I pronouncing that right, Tracy?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. Okay, great. That she is the city's ARPA grant specialist and has been tracking what's going on at the state level and local resources. And I want to give her a few minutes to just introduce herself and talk a little bit about what you're hearing.
Yeah, do I have the ability to share my screen?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I have some notes here, and Julie, I can give you a PDF of these notes with the active link. So I'm going to kind of rush through this more than I had planned because I know you're pressed for time, but you will have all these notes with active links and my contact info if you want to dive into anything further. So again, my name's Tracy Pohndorf. I'm a grants administrator with the city of Missoula, and I deal specifically with funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA. And ARPA can be a real jungle, especially understanding potential funding coming through the state. So I'm just going to share some quick updates with you today. And we'll start with just a couple of federal funding opportunities. Here's that EDA link to all of the ARPA funding opportunities. And if I would strongly suggest, I know this from teams I'm working with who are applying for those grants, get a hold of Kirk and he can really help you through. And they're big applications, so get a head start on those. AmeriCorps has a funding opportunity that's open. The deadline is February 3rd. It's specifically for the AmeriCorps Seniors Program. There's a lot of focus areas that they cover, and they're actually hosting a webinar later today if anyone is interested in learning more about that program. So as far as state updates, the state of Montana has 4 advisory commissions that they're set up to allocate the ARPA funding that's flowing through the state. And these commissions make funding recommendations to the governor, who has the ultimate final approval. So I'll go through this link up here is just to the main ARPA Montana website. There's a ton of information on that. It can be a little bit hard to navigate, but all the information is there. Health Advisory Commission primarily works with the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. So the easiest way to find open funding opportunities is not on the state's ARPA page, but go to Montana DPHHS, and they have their own ARPA page that they've just recently started. And there it's really easy to see what you can apply for today and what's coming up in the future. So a lot of funding that Montana DPHHS deals with comes direct from federal agencies like Health and Human Services and the CDC. So the funding comes to them with very particular guidelines. And right now they're accepting applications for school health workforce development, child care stabilization grants, and child care assistance for healthcare workers. I believe that does include people who work at nursing facilities, nursing homes, and mental health care workers. So coming up, they have even more funding for childcare. They've got a pot of money set aside for innovation grants and support and assistance projects for communities and childcare businesses. Their meeting next week is their next meeting, so there might be more information coming from them. Another commission is the Communications Advisory Commission. So they just met last week, and the big news is they released a draft of what's called the 2022 Connect Montana application. I do have a PDF. Again, I can send that to Julie to send out to the group if you want to take a look at that application. This is all for broadband funding. So they're looking at a funding round starting in late January with a deadline of late March. Wide scope of eligible applicants, including businesses. Eligible project is broadband development in an unserved or underserved area. And there's very specific definitions in the guidelines, and they're all based on download and upload speeds in megabits per second. A lot of eligible costs are included, including middle mile, last mile infrastructure. That refers to the final leg that connects the service provider network to the customer's on-premise telecommunications. And expenses can include anything from project planning to construction permits to construction. I will note the commission sent a letter to Treasury asking for the second tranche of funding. So again, the state received, like the city, 2 tranches of funding for their total allocation from the Treasury. The second one is coming in June, but the Communications Advisory Commission wants it before then, because of course, if we don't get it till June and distribute it, we really are a long ways into the construction season here. Okay, let's see. Third commission I'll talk about is a mouthful: Economic Transformation and Stabilization and Workforce Development Programs. And they call themselves EWAC for short, which is great. So just think of Economic Workforce Advisory Commission. Montana Department of Commerce, Department of Labor and Industry, Office of Budget and Program Planning, and the Department of Agriculture all work with the EWAC Commission. So this is an interesting commission to keep track of, because they cover more ground and seem to have more flexibility moving money around than the other commissions. There's a couple of open funding opportunities. These are coming through the Department of Commerce. There's an ARPA workforce training grant program, which reimburses businesses up to $3,000 per eligible new and existing full-time employee. And there's also an apprenticeship program, which funds eligible construction-related apprenticeship training providers. And there is a specific list of those providers. They have allocated other funding. There's a rapid retraining program that's in the works. And also the Department of Agriculture is accepting concept papers for value-added agricultural projects. So those are projects that would increase food and agriculture business capacity in Montana. More EWAC updates. So the return to work bonus program has ended. They're getting final payments out by the end of this year. The commission has an estimated $10 million to reallocate, and they said that's a very conservative estimate. And they did already allocate a little over $4 million to a new relocation for healthcare providers program. So we'll be hearing more about that. In the world of housing, this is also Department of Commerce. They have started a 90-day consultation and feedback period for allocation of the state's $11.4 million in home ARP funding. So you don't have to wait for them to get a hold of you. If you want to give some feedback on what you think would be important, definitely contact Department of Commerce. I probably have specific contacts that would help. I want to say too, since I see some names in the nonprofit world, I believe there's a percentage of funding that's allowable for operating expenses for nonprofits that deal with affordable housing, and money for operating expenses never happens. So that's something special about that pot of funding. The commission is trying to navigate Treasury's guidelines on over 119 million allocated for state capital projects. So last spring, the state identified potential capital projects. Most are not compatible with Treasury's latest guidance. So they've been working a lot on that. And I don't know if they're accepting ideas, but this is, again, a commission that's open to hearing from everybody. So if you have something in mind, I would definitely, again, get a hold of Department of Commerce. The tricky part about the guidelines, these multi-purpose community projects for state capital projects need to include 3 components: work plus education plus healthcare monitoring. The state added another eligibility limit. So these projects have to happen in state-owned building and facilities, but that does include the university system. And then one other really interesting item that was brought up in the last meeting, which was end of October, is a potential business innovation program. So what this would be, and this is according to the Office of Budget and Program Planning, is a revolving loan fund for small businesses. They said details would be revealed at the next meeting. They were supposed to meet last week, but they rescheduled and still don't see a date for the next meeting on that. But I thought that was a really interesting project coming up. Takes us to infrastructure Advisory Commission, which runs through Montana DNRC. They're plugging away with their minimum allocation grant applications and round 2 competitive grant applications. One new thing is this irrigation grant program. It's open to a much broader eligibility is open to a lot of organizations aside from local government, but the projects must include a clean water benefit. That is the important thing to note there, and that's a mid-January deadline. Commission also sent a letter to Treasury urging consideration of ARPA funding for dam, reservoir, and floodplain projects, especially for rural states. Their next meeting is middle of December. And one thing I would really love to mention is we're still getting updated info on ARPA guidelines. This has made a lot of cities and states pause before they allocate more funding or set up grant programs. So if this just kind of seems like a smattering of grant opportunities, I do expect more will come. And there is a little ripple effect with the infrastructure bill that just passed. There's a bill currently in the House that started as an amendment to the infrastructure bill, and unknown what the trajectory is, but it would allow additional flexibility in our ARPA guidelines and make some of the ARPA guidelines more compatible with the infrastructure bill. So we're waiting to hear about that. I've included a link on the article from the National League of Cities. And also at the bottom of this last slide, there's a link to a fact sheet of what the state of Montana could expect from the infrastructure bill, and that's coming from whitehouse.gov. But anyway, just know that, you know, we're still waiting for final rule on ARPA guidelines. We have an interim rule. We just received in November a revised set of compliance and reporting regulations. So that keeps mentioning the final rule is coming. It makes sense that they might wait a little bit to make it more compatible with some of the guidelines in infrastructure bill, especially in crossover areas like broadband and water sewer projects, because infrastructure bill guidelines are wider than the current ARPA guidelines. So, okay, I'm going to stop.
That was great. Wow. I think you might be getting some calls after this call.
That's fine. That's fine. I know we're pressed for time, but that's what I do. I just mention things and bring up a bunch of more questions.
Well, and it's on me to put a meeting together and throw a ton of information into it when we haven't met in a while, but just welcome back, everybody. I love that you did that PDF. I will share it out. There's tons of information there. Again, like sort of a stay tuned process, but knowing where to be looking for these things, I think is what this group will find so valuable. I had mentioned